Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. We will be waiting just a couple of more minutes. We're missing a few people, so we want to make sure that we get them in to get started all together. So thanks for your patience. All right. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Center State CEO webinar. Fraud didn't stop for COVID-19, neither should your risk management strategy. So thank you so much for your participation today. My name is Jessica Underwood, and I'm the sales manager at Center State CEO, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. So this webinar will cover the emerging types of fraud you should look out for, and will also help you efficiently reduce your known risks through both planning and implementation of tools and resources. We do hope to have some time for your questions at the end of the webinar. And a huge thank you to the Bonadio group for presenting today's webinar. We are very lucky to have expert speakers with us today, Kristen Clark, John Roman, and Tim Ball. So we're looking forward to their presentation today. So just a few logistics, ground rules. I'm sure that we've all participated in some of these webinars before, but just a reminder. So everyone will be muted during the entire webinar except for the speakers. And during the presentation, please write your questions in the chat box. Hopefully, again, we'll have time for those at the end. And that is accessible through the chat button at the bottom of your screen. We will be recording the webinar today, and the presentation slides will be available afterwards as well. So without any further ado, I will hand it over to Kristen. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Yes, and just to reiterate what Jessica said, thank you all for joining us today. I think we're going to have a really good session for you. My name is Kristen Clark. I'm the managing partner of the Bonadio Group here in Syracuse. And I'm also a Center State board member, so I'm thanking you for joining us wearing two different hats. So we're really pleased that you're here. I've got a couple of slides. Jessica, if you don't mind even just flipping through them quickly. I'm not going to talk about each one of them. I just wanted to include them so that you could have them for your reference after the session, because I really want to get right to John and Tim's presentation. So a few slides about our firm. We're a full-service accounting and advisory and consulting firm based primarily in upstate New York, but really we serve clients everywhere. So we love to work with anybody who's got some issues or questions for us. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John Roman, so we can get right into the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm John Roman. I am responsible for a division of Bonadio Group called FoxPointe Solutions, and we provide cybersecurity, compliance, attestation, and advisory services to clients throughout the country. So as Jessica noted, we're going to talk about a few things, right? Most common types of fraud. What are some new fraud opportunities for bad people? Critical steps to reduce risk associated with both cyber fraud, that's what I'm going to talk about, as well as some of the fraud that Tim is going to talk about. In today's current environment, i.e. the pandemic or COVID-19, how does that affect us as managers, business owners, etc.? And then what are some of the internal controls that we can put in place in terms of overall fraud or cybersecurity scams and phishing? So if we can go to the next slide, please. Great. So I pulled these statistics about a month ago, and they're pretty telling. But I'm sure you've all experienced these three misconceptions. The first is, my company is too small to be targeted. The second is, only large companies get hacked. And the third is, I got cybersecurity insurance, so who cares, right? My insurance provider is going to help me. The problem is, in terms of company size, and I personally consult with small to medium-sized businesses, that the tools that hackers use that traverse the internet don't discriminate. They don't look for a large company versus small company versus one person versus 5 million people. They look for vulnerabilities. And once those tools find a vulnerability, they're going to try to exploit them and launch their attack. The second is, of course, the only time we hear about a hack is when a large company gets hacked, right? The latest is United Health Systems, supposedly now the largest hack that's ever occurred, but the jury's still out on that. But we don't hear about the small business with 25 employees who suffered a ransomware attack and were down for a week. And those are more prevalent than those larger companies. And then cyber insurance is extremely critical. But I also believe there's a false sense of security having cybersecurity insurance, i.e., well, if something bad happens, my insurance provider is going to pay the ransom, is going to pay for me to recover. But that doesn't include the reputational damage that's going to occur, the downtime that you're going to occur. And if you look at the second to last statistic, that 60% of hacked small businesses go out of business within 6 months after the hack, that's telling. So those are some, I thought we'd set the stage with some recent statistics in the current environment that we live in. And this is only compounded by COVID-19 and some of the fraud that's going on related to COVID-19. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is cyber fraud? Well, it's no different than regular fraud, except it uses computers and the internet, and sometimes how busy we are. But what I wanted to mention here is ransomware is growing. And not only am I responsible for FoxPointe, but I'm also Bonadio's Chief Information Officer. And I don't know how many times a salesperson has asked you what keeps you up at night. Whenever I'm asked, nothing, absolutely. When my head hits the pillow, I go to sleep. That really keeps me up at night. But the one thing I worry about most is a ransomware attack. And whether we're going to be able to prevent one, but most importantly, how quickly can we recover from one? Today, 1/3 of all cyber fraud and crime is committed through a ransomware attack, and it's growing. And the third statistic was just this month, last month in September. Partly due to COVID, but mostly due because it's a tremendous moneymaker for hackers, organized crime, as well as nation states. And so it's also important to know how ransomware is getting in. And 47% of the ransomware that gets in, people might think come in through an email message via a phishing attempt, but it's really through remote access. It's through an insecure remote access connection whether that remote access connection is using Microsoft's remote desktop or Citrix or the like. The next biggest statistic is 28% come in through an email, whether that it's a malicious link or it's a malicious PDF or Word document that launches the ransomware attack. So in terms of security controls, and we're going to talk a little bit about those, really our biggest vulnerability now, especially during COVID-19 and the millions of workers who are now working from home, is remote access into companies' networks. Many ransomware variants today are not only holding you hostage, so you have to pay me 1 Bitcoin for every computer that's been encrypted, but the ransomware that goes out today is really targeting data as well. So the new threat is, if you don't pay me, I'm going to publish your data. And I'm going to publish it to an online resource that everybody has access to, which for companies that can recover from a ransomware attack by not paying it, awesome. But then there's a risk of, if I don't pay or we don't pay, my data is going to get published anyway. And that's extremely, it's really a pressure that we all have on us, because who knows who we're funding through a ransomware attack. So that's an issue. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So talking a little bit more about what the impact is since COVID. Interesting that the FBI is reporting that they are now receiving about 4,000 complaints per day since the lockdown occurred. Cybercrime and fraud has increased by 400%. And I know this probably isn't a surprise to too many people, but the majority of these crimes are committed by foreign criminals. One of the reasons why is it's very difficult to go after cyber criminals who are located in a country. The majority of cyber criminals are located in countries where there are no extradition, i.e. North Korea, Russia, Iran. So it's very difficult for the United States to reach out, China, to reach out and grab a cyber criminal or an organized crime ring that is launching these attacks. And some of the interesting ways that fraud is being committed electronically, specifically to COVID, is in and around these fake sites that are being created that users are being directed to for the latest COVID vaccine, the latest cure to COVID. Click here to look at statistics related to your country's infection. These are all attention grabbers that 90% of us, because we're so busy, may access because we're just so busy and we want to know what the latest infection rate is in the capital region, for instance, or in Monroe County in Rochester, New York. So these people take advantage of our personal vulnerabilities. Next slide, please. I wanted to pull this industry's target slide up to point out a few different things. First, there really should be no surprises in terms of who are the hardest hit in terms related to targets. But if anybody who's familiar with D.B. Cooper, if you remember D.B. Cooper back in the bank robbery days, he was asked, "Why do you rob banks?" And his response was, "Because that's where the money is," right? So now ask a hacker, why do you hack companies? Because that's where the data is, right? Specifically in finance, professional and information services, education, right? Data is our new money. Data is really our new gold. That's why there's ransomware attacks, because our data is worth something. It's worth something to us. It's worth something to our customers. And this is true as, you know, for those industries that I mentioned. A little less true for some of the other targeted industries. For instance, public, state and local government. There, hackers want to cause disruption. Hackers want to cause people to not have faith in infrastructure. They go after those state and local governments, yes, for the data, but more to create uncertainty and doubt of whether, if you pick up the phone and call 911, are you going to be able to get through? Okay, so getting back to these automated tools, I can't stress enough that we are all targets. The tools that hackers use traverse the internet, and they look for vulnerabilities. They look for vulnerabilities on your personal computers. They look for vulnerabilities on your computers, on your network. And once they find one, they could care less if it's a single person or 500 people. Next slide, Pete, please. Okay, so we all think a cyber criminal looks like a pimple-faced 15-year-old, right? That's our view of a cyber criminal. Hardly true. As you could see, these are the FBI's most wanted cyber criminals. If anybody has seen one of these characters, the reward, I think, is now up to $100,000, so you might be able to make some cash. But by and large, cyber criminals are either from nation states, primarily Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, the Ukraine. They are from organized crime, specifically from those countries, but the United States can also be included. Or they may be both. So I'll tell you what the Russians have been doing lately. So the Russians say they're cracking down on cybercrime. But what they're really doing is they're going after that individual or small group of cyber criminals and saying, hey, I got a deal for you. You're either going to spend 25 years in Siberia, or you're going to come to work for the Russian government. And we're going to let you continue doing your cybercrime, but you're also going to do a couple projects on the side, i.e. hack the American election or create uncertainty and doubt. So we're not going to send you to Siberia. We're going to let you do your little cyber criminal activities, but you're going to work for the Russian government for a period of time. These people are extremely intelligent. They are adept at social engineering, getting us to do something we wouldn't normally do. They typically hold advanced degrees in mathematics and computer science. And they may or may not be in the military. If these people spent half the time doing something legitimately, we'd be able to find the cure for COVID a lot quicker than we're able to. So these are what cyber criminals primarily look like in their skill set. Okay, next slide, please. So what do you do if you suffered an event or incident? You really do a few different things. First is you really have to prepare for the inevitable, because everybody on this call is going to get hacked. So you got to prepare for that. And the way you prepare, at least from a company perspective, is you do incident response tabletops that you rehearse a response. The second thing is you got to have the ability to detect a virus. So what processes, procedures, people, and tools do you have in place to detect a virus from spreading? You have to know how to contain it. So if it is spreading, what is it that you're going to do to contain it? Are you going to unplug everybody from the network? Are you going to shut the internet down, etc.? How did it happen? Provide some investigation so it doesn't happen again, so you can close those holes that enabled it to happen. Who was patient zero? So who is the first person that got infected and spread it? What is the virus doing? Is it exfiltrating data? Is it locking down computers in the form of ransom? Is it installing key logging software? remediate? What tools and people do you have in place to fix the problem? And then finally, after all the dust is settled, doing a debrief. Here's what we did well. Here's some opportunities for improvement. Next slide. And finally, before I hand it over to Tim, I'm going to save everybody probably 20 minutes of reading. You don't have to read any online article or otherwise, or other publication that says there's a magic bullet to fix cyber fraud. There isn't. If you do these things that I have outlined in front of you, you will greatly reduce your risk of cyber fraud and hacking. But there is not a magic bullet. You cannot go out and buy technology. You can't buy enough people. You have to perform these practical steps. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Tim, and he will take over this presentation from here. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Thanks, John. Nice job.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, you can mute yourself now, John. Thanks. All right. So just skip this slide because this is a chapter of contents we're probably not going to make it all the way through. But I'm gonna start out and talk about fraud here, based on kind of the pandemic, the world we now live in, and I'm going to give some tips on some things to look out for within your organization, within the employees that work in your organization. And we're going to talk about some tips some things that you can kind of keep your eyes out for to protect your organization from fraud. So I'm going to first start out by just saying, look, these are scary times. At times in history, when we've had national disasters, terrorist attacks, the 2008 mortgage crisis, and any war that we've had, the economy has suffered and businesses have suffered. And one of the unfortunate products that comes out of those times is a lot more fraud. And now we can add this global pandemic to the list. And I'm going to tell you why. Go to the next slide. So businesses struggle with fraud during times of economic crisis. And here's the reasons. There's a lot more pressure on a company to meet its earning targets, to secure financing, to continue to let the owners and the employees earn the wages that they've earned. And because of that, you get things that happen such as falsifying the financial statements or changing, reporting or holding reporting so that stockholders or the board can't see exactly what's going on. You accept unvetted customers. How many businesses did we hear about that all of a sudden their suppliers had no supply? And so they may have been reaching out to other states that weren't as impacted by the pandemic in the beginning stages and getting new suppliers or accepting customers that they didn't have as much time to vet, or they were really, really unwilling to vet because they were so desperate to continue to have business. And then the third here is dangerously cutting costs and expenditures. We know a lot of companies that once the pandemic hit, everyone started to panic, and we started cutting positions. We started cutting important employees that maybe weren't part of the revenue producing activities within an organization or a company. And we even saw them cutting other expenses. And a lot of what they cut during that time period might have been IT and cybersecurity type protection that they had been paying for, or ongoing monitoring services that they've been paying for. Those oftentimes made it into the bucket of those aren't as crucial at this time, right? And we have to cut those expenditures. The other thing here is that employees were under a lot of personal economic pressure, and I'm going to get into why. But that made employees, especially in extremely important positions within an organization, such as accounting, such as the IT groups, if they were under a lot of personal pressure at home because of the economic crisis and because of the pandemic, that made them more likely to utilize their position within a company to potentially steal money and obviously create fraud. And then this last is cutthroat mentality to keep your job. You may have been much more willing to throw your neighbor under the bus to make sure that you kept your position. And that oftentimes can create an environment that's ripe for fraud. Next slide, please. So again, the 2008 recession is really the most recent time that we can point to in which there was a kind of something drastic happened to the economy and happened to the businesses and the business world. And what happened during that time? Well, during the 2008 recession, fraud examiners such as myself noted a huge elevated level of fraud and fraud investigations during that time period. And over 80% of fraud examiners, and I follow a lot of like the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which is a global network of fraud examiners who talk about their daily client base and and all the jobs and investigations that they do, over 80% of them said that they truly believe that fraud levels increase dramatically during times of economic distress. Next slide. So again, in August, the ACFE did another study to kind of give us fraud examiners some idea of what's going on out there. And 77% of fraud examiners have already observed an increase in the overall level of fraud based on what's going on from the pandemic. And then it's 11% increase from May. And then 92% of them believe that this is going to continue to increase over the next year. I'm here to tell you, as the leader of the Bonadio fraud and forensic practice, this is absolutely true right now. We are getting a huge influx in fraud referrals and fraud investigations that we're conducting, and many of them are based on either a result of the pandemic, a result of COVID, or, as we're going to talk about in a minute, basically things that were found because of changes that were made in the business based on the pandemic. Not necessarily fraud that was happening starting in March, but fraud that was happening a year ago and now is discovered during the pandemic because an organization started to really take a look at their balance sheet and their profit and loss statement with a fine-tooth comb to try to cut, unneeded expenditures and increase that margin line during a time when revenue was a lot smaller and shorter. Next slide, please. So let's talk about really where this pressure comes from in times of economic crisis and how it impacts both internal and external, people who can commit fraud for an organization, both internally and externally. So we go back to this Cressey fraud triangle, and many of you, if you ever took a fun accounting or fraud class in college, or even in high school, or you took an MBA class that talked about fraud, you may have heard about this Cressey fraud triangle. When I first heard about the Cressey fraud triangle as I was studying for my certified fraud examiner license back in the day, I thought, yeah, this is just that textbook stuff that you got to learn about to pass a test. I don't think this is, obviously one of those things that's really like applicable in the real world. What I discovered through my years of fraud examination is that this is the Bible. When we discover someone who's a fraudster, who's committed a fraud in an organization, they almost always have a third of this fraud triangle. They have some pressure on them personally, they have some opportunity, and they have rationalization. So let's get right into it, because again, what I want you to be thinking about as we're going through these is both internally, the employees that are in your organization or in an organization that you volunteer in, or if you serve on a board of a non-for-profit or the board of your church, or you're in the PTA, or you have an organization that has important key roles in accounting, in the finance department, in your IT department, in operations, in sales. I want you to be thinking that during the pandemic, this Cressey fraud triangle is really, these pieces that I'm going to talk about, is what pushes someone from a situation in which they're an honest employee, or they're an honest vendor of your company, or an honest vendor of a government entity, into potentially committing fraud because of the pandemic. And I'm going to talk about why. So the first slide, let's move on. The first here is pressure. So the pandemic specifically has created a significant amount of financial pressure on a lot of families and a lot of business professionals throughout our world. Spouses have lost jobs. People have taken large pay cuts. And, again, a lot of people live, you'd be surprised to know, and maybe you wouldn't be surprised, how many people live paycheck to paycheck. So if you live paycheck to paycheck, you're paying your mortgage every month, you've got a nice house, and it's a nice brick house, you got a BMW in the driveway maybe because, you've had a good job, you might be living paycheck to paycheck. And if we go and say we have to give you a 15% cut because the business is suffering and that's the only way that we can keep you on, people can't handle that. Some people have no ability to handle that pay cut during the pandemic. Other things, we have family members who lose jobs and maybe have to move in and be financially supported. We had a lot of childcare issues during the pandemic. Schooling became virtual. People had to drop down to part-time so that they could watch all their children that were supposed to be away at daycare, supposed to be away at summer camps, supposed to be in school. And then you have the medical issues from the pandemic. You have family members that were unfortunately losing their lives. You have family members that were in the hospital because of COVID itself. You have a lot of other situations here that have contributed to a significant amount of pressure for individuals in very important positions in many, many companies. Okay. All right. Next slide. So that's one part of the triangle. Another is rationalization. So if you need all three parts of these triangle, we have the pressure now established. We have someone who maybe took a pay cut, or we have a family member who moved in with them because they lost their jobs. We have financial pressure. Now we need a rationalization. So we need an individual who comes into their job every day, maybe is the CFO or the controller of the accounting department, and says, okay, I need to rationalize. I need money from somewhere. Should I take it from this company? Well, a lot of individuals, you'd be amazed at how many forensic investigations I've done when we finally catch the fraudster. We say, why did you do it? Or whatever. And they say, I didn't steal. I was just borrowing it. I needed this money. I had full intentions of paying it back. I was going to pay it back. I could probably pay some of it back right now. Okay. And we'll often say, well, sir, you've been stealing for 7 years. I don't see any payments coming back. When were you planning on starting that payment plan of repaying your fraud? Another one is, I deserve the money for all I do around here. We have a lot of individuals, and especially with the pandemic, if you think about it, if you had a controller in the finance team, maybe had a staff of 5 accountants that was normally operating the finance group, and the company had to lay 3 of them off. Now you have a controller who is working double time to try to handle all the financial information, all the financial responsibilities that are coming in from the company, potentially dealing with maybe a PPP loan application and other things, and doing a bunch of other people's jobs. And they have pressure at home. They may say, you know what? They should be paying me more anyways. I should be getting a COVID bonus, for Christ's sake. I deserve a lot more money for all I do around here. I've been doing it for decades. They can rationalize taking that money. The next is, it's a freaking pandemic, man. All bets are off. I don't care about this company. I don't care about the company down the road. The only thing I care about is my family. And I can rationalize that I need this money more than this company needs this money. And I'm going to actually do good with it because I'm supporting my parents who now have to live with me. Again, this organization does not take care of us. The owners just keep getting richer. This has come up a lot with the PPP loans. We've done some investigations where an organization took a PPP loan or a CARES Act loan to support and keep employees on, and then the owner has a new truck in their driveway in the month of May. And employees look at that and say, what the heck? If that guy's going to take the money, then so do I. I'm going to take it too. The last year is victimless crime. You have the individuals who maybe work for a church or a school or a government or a not-for-profit, where if they do steal the money, they don't have to walk in every day and look at the people that they're actually stealing it from. Okay, in a church, everyone puts $5 in the bucket every Sunday. It's not really going to make one way or the other whether I take $300 of it when I'm counting the money at the end of Sunday because I'm the treasurer for the week of the church. No one's going to really notice that $100 or $200 or $300 is missing. No one's going to notice their $5 didn't make it to the church. Somewhat of a victimless crime. I don't really have to stare at all these people every day. And so that, again, you've rationalized. Let's go to the last slide. So we've got 2 parts now of the triangle. Here's the third. And again, I want you to think about the professionals that are working in your organization, the vendors that are serving that are serving your organization, your customers that you're selling work to. If they have an opportunity to take advantage of you, and some of these things are going on in the fraud triangle, they may do it. People don't just wake up one day and go, you know what? There's really no general reason, but I think I'm going to try to steal $100,000 over the next year. Why not? Fun, right? Very rarely is that truly the case. More often, you have a really good employee who's in good standing, has no reason to want to steal from their organization, and then things happen, life happens, and then all these parts of the triangle come together. So the last year is opportunity. You can have all the pressure in the world on your controller. He can rationalize until he's blue in the face that he can steal from this organization, but if he doesn't have opportunity, if there is such good internal controls that he can't get away with it, or there's really good anti-fraud protections in your organization, there's good systems analysis, there's reconciliations, and there's no way for him to know that he can get away with it even for very long, then he can't steal. He can't. It's very hard for him to steal, or very hard for him to get away with it for a significant period of time. But if there is opportunity, that's really the third and crucial piece. So there's pressure, he can rationalize it. Now let's talk about opportunity. Specifically in the pandemic, companies have cut costs in non-revenue generating departments. So compliance, internal audit. If you think about that finance example I gave you, where there was a team of 5 and they cut it down to 3, and now the controller is writing the checks and receiving the bank statements and reconciling the bank statements every month because Judy, Becky, and Jim are gone, and those were their responsibilities. Internal controls and policy and procedure that protected against fraud in the past are out the window when half the finance team is gone, right? So of course, a company looks, when they're trying to generate revenue and they're trying to survive in a pandemic, they say, who can we cut? And they often cut non-revenue generating departments. And so if you look at that and think about IT too, and John brought that up, If you looked at protecting your organization, and we know that fraud is higher during a pandemic, and instead the organization decides we got to cut half our people out of IT because we can't afford them, and we think we can work with a skeleton crew, you might have actually just cost the company more money in the long run because you cut money by taking those positions out, but then you got a ransomware that costs you a heck of a lot more. So if you think about it from that standpoint, it's actually scary. The pandemic's scary that organizations had to do this. And we created a ripe environment for fraud. The next thing here is remote work environment. A lot of folks are working from home. And I've talked to a lot of organizations when they said, hey, yeah, our controller and our CFO are now working from home. We had to basically just give them access to every system. We had to give them access to all the systems because it was really the only way they could work effectively from home in a remote environment. And we don't really have the opportunity to protect them as much. We can't even see their schedule when they're logging in and out. Generally some of the systems were on site, and that was the only time they could use them was when other people were around and looking over their shoulder. And now everyone just has access to every system 24/7. Very hard for us to keep an eye on everything that's going on. Oversight and segregation of duties is thrown out the window. I already talked about that. And often companies, especially in financial departments like accounting and things like that, during the time of the pandemic when everything was rough, we were trying to bring in new customers. We were scraping like hell to get revenue in the door and to cut expenditures. We were oftentimes applying for PPP loans and didn't know what the heck we were doing, right? Financial departments were just trying their best to stay afloat and trying to make their way through the pandemic. And because of that, many of the oversight procedures, the fact that the CFO may have sat down with the bank statements or sat down with copies of the canceled checks in the past and really fine-tooth comb reviewed them or sent them to the board, all of that was gone. The CFO might just say, I'm just trying to survive here. Jimmy, get those checks out the door. I don't have time to review them. I don't have time to sign them, whatever the case may be. And so that has really led to it. Next slide, please. So I kind of said this. During times of recession, we expect more fraud to occur. We also expect more fraud to be uncovered. Warren Buffett said it best. I love this quote. It's the best. You only find out who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. When companies really started taking a hardcore look at cash flow and a hardcore look at expenditures, and they really started saying, oh my God, we're really searching now for ways for our business to stay afloat, that fraud scheme that might have been going on for the past 6, 12, 18 months, where maybe Jim in operations was adding an extra 5 hours of overtime to his schedule every week, and no one really knew or really understood, and there was no review. And then all of a sudden they start taking a fine-tooth look at payroll, and they're saying, wait a minute, man, Jimmy really, compared to last year and now what we're paying him month to month now, it's significantly different. His job really hasn't changed. Like, why is that? Or they might uncover some fraud schemes that have been going on for a significant amount of period of time. I'll give you an example. We have an organization that said, oh my God, we got to cut costs. One of the costs we're going to cut is our janitorial services. We're not really in the building, so we don't need the building cleaned. So let's call that company let's call that company and talk to them about our contract and see if we could cut it down. And what they recognize is that that janitorial company actually didn't exist. That janitorial company wasn't even a real company. It was a fake company. It was a shell company for one of the employees that was in purchasing, who was having their sister-in-law come and vacuum the floor every night, pretending to be part of an actual janitorial company. And there was actually no. And the check was going to the purchasing department, to the lady that was working in purchasing. She had set up a dummy company. And this was all discovered because they tried to call and see if they could change the janitorial company or knock down the contract. The building only needs to be cleaned once a week now. They got no one. When they followed the number all the way through, they got a hold of their purchasing lady. Her phone rang. Okay, crazy, right? So a lot of ongoing frauds can be discovered when business stops and cash flow dries up and expenses are analyzed. And the Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme was actually discovered because of the 2008 recession. Could have gone on a lot further. It was actually discovered because of this similar activity. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk I got about 10 minutes here. I'm going to talk about some specific fraud schemes that are related to COVID-19 in itself, and some things that we just want to keep in mind, things that we're starting to see out in the fraud environment now that I would say are a little more new. The first one here is occupational employee fraud. This is not new, but this is a little different. It feels a little different now that we've had a pandemic and some of these issues that I've talked about, where we have people working from home, we have a high pressure environment and economy, and we potentially have less internal controls, duties and segregation of duties and oversight. And so we're seeing a little bit more fraudulent reporting of time and overtime. We have a lot of governments that are really concerned right now about overtime in their fire departments and their police departments. We have a lot of hospitals and medical facilities that are really concerned about specific overtime and whether it's really relevant. We had hospitals during the pandemic that had everyone, boots on the ground, tons of nurses in, and they were actually less busy as a hospital because they weren't having the elective surgeries and they weren't having people visiting the hospital because they were scared of COVID. But they look back at those times and they say, but why did our payroll expense continue to balloon? Was there fraud? Was there people taking advantage of this situation? Those are situations which, yeah, I would generally say there's probably some fraudulent activity going on because of the pandemic. We have a lot of people with inappropriate access to business bank accounts, check stock, and business credit cards. I tell this story all the time. I have a good friend who's a controller of an organization, and she was told, hey, we have no idea how we're going to pay checks because we're not allowed in the building. Why don't you go ahead and take the check printer home and the check stock, and then if we need a check, you can print one right at home, and we'll have someone stop by and pick it up. And I said, so wait, you have the actual check printer and the check stock at your house, and you were the one who receives and reconciles the bank statements? And she said, yeah, like we needed to do that. It was the only way around. And I said, well, who's checking on it? Who's looking? Well, she said, well, I also reviewed the checks and the copies of the checks at the end of the month. I said, oh my God, you could just steal money from your organization right now. No one would know the difference. That's an example of, an individual having what would be considered inappropriate and wouldn't otherwise happen type access to these items. Again, unfettered access to internal accounting and reporting systems. I talked about, controllers now having access that they wouldn't normally have, and CFOs having access because, well, we're working from home, so we got to give them access to everything. Less oversight over procurement policies, vendor usage. If you had a purchasing agent who wanted to squeeze their brother-in-law in for a contract with a local government or a not-for-profit to do some work around, a facility or a service, now's a really good time for them to sneak them in. Because maybe no one's really paying attention, and we kind of the normal policies went out the window. Your brother-in-law needs money because he lost his job, so let's get him a contract mowing the lawns around here. Whether he shows up or not is going to be beside the point, and probably people aren't paying attention, and he'll get paid. The last here is skimming of cash receipts, payments, AR write-offs, bad debt. We've seen a couple organizations really take advantage of the pandemic, have some AR that's been riding for quite a long time on their books, and write it off during the pandemic because was anyone really paying attention? Maybe squeeze some of that right off through. So again, these are pandemic type things, but they could happen anytime. This is the reason that I'm in business, that I have a full-time job as a fraud investigator. But COVID has made these even more dramatic, and the instance of these is occurring a lot more. Next slide, please. Let's get into something specific to the pandemic. Financial institution fraud. Banks are really struggling right now. Many more people are doing all their banking virtually. They're not, driving to the bank to do business now. They're paying a lot more bills online. This was the time, right? Not sending checks through the mail as much. And so we've had a lot of instances more of new account fraud. We've had entities that have had bank accounts set up in their name with one letter different at the end of their name. And now they have a bank account. And if this person can somehow siphon off checks from this organization or payments, they may be able to convince a bank to deposit them into these other accounts. We have a lot of identity theft going on right now. As John said, a lot of foreign entities, a lot of foreign criminals are taking advantage of the fact that everyone's kind of like up in arms, like, oh my God, we're in a pandemic. I don't know what's going on. And they may be much more likely to click on links, much less likely to be checking their credit score, right? And so identity theft is at an all-time high. Imposter schemes, impersonations of government agencies, again, offering testing, offering a cure, offering all sorts of stuff to our vulnerable populations. People who aren't as technologically savvy. Some of our elder, people in the United States who may be much more likely to be scared during a pandemic and get taken advantage of. And then the money mule, moving money on behalf of another entity person because of COVID limitations. We've seen this quite a bit, especially in some of the government entities in which we have businesses that are trying to do business and they can't access their money, or they don't have access to the bank, or they're having struggles for whatever reason, and they tend to try to convince another entity to do something for them. And it might not be in the best interest of either entity that transaction occurs. Next slide, please. Very specifically in the PPP loans, this slide's a little weird looking on here, but basically, look, the PPP, a lot of people applied for it. There's also a lot of fraud, and we're getting a lot of fraud claims coming in from this, and a lot of organizations that are wondering what happened. We had PPP applications with manipulated or fraudulent supporting documentation, lying about the financials of an organization to potentially get more money out of a PPP loan or inappropriate money. We had applications that were in different names that contained nearly identical information. We've heard a lot of stories about an organization filing a PPP loan and it getting rejected because there's already an application in their name. We've had, fake information and supporting documentation, fake businesses established during the pandemic with a bunch of fake financial information to make it look like they were a real business before they applied for the PPP loan. Lots of fraud. If you go to the United States Department of Justice website and you look at the headlines, the fraud headlines, every day you're going to see someone getting indicted for creating a false entity or receiving false or fraudulent PPP checks and taking advantage, unfortunately, of this program that helps support our businesses. Next slide. Same thing in the CARES Act. The CARES Act is basically the same, but again, organizations, businesses are trying to take advantage of both. Trying to put an application in for one and the other simultaneously and seeing if they go through. Government obviously doesn't have a real good handle on that sometimes. We have inflated wages or number of employees to increase the amount of tax credit. So again, just basically lying in the application, providing fraudulent supporting documentation to try to get more money. And then you have, again, check deposits into accounts with no indication of business or payroll activity. Again, people getting stolen information. The other thing that we're seeing that's related to this is a lot of organizations are calling us and saying, we're getting a lot of requests for unemployment benefits to employees that either don't exist, have never worked here, or have worked here and we didn't lay them off, or we didn't fire them or terminate them. They have no reason to have an unemployment claim, or again, employees that already have their own unemployment claim in. And some of that comes back to one of the first questions we ask those organizations is, are you sure you didn't have a breach? Because they do need to get a lot of internal financial information and personal information for any employee that they attempt to file an unemployment claim for. So if you had a few of those instances, you might be concerned about some type of breach or access to your information. You might want to call a guy like John and ask him if there's some steps or procedures you should take. And the second thing is how do you deal with it? Do you not pay it? Do you pay it? We've had some organizations asking those questions as well. And I would recommend you reach out to your attorney. You reach out to your counsel and ask them what the best thing is to do in those instances. Next slide. So this last one, just the simple stuff, the ones that you read about the most on the news, they love to glorify these, but like the individual who bought, pallets of hand sanitizer in the beginning of the pandemic and then tried to sell them at, extremely elevated costs and rates, really taking advantage of it. The virus and antibody testing fraud schemes, those emails and those things you saw where they say, hey, we'll send you a free testing kit and you get your results in 2 weeks. Those were generally all fake in the beginning, and they were money grabs for people. And a lot of price gouging. A lot of, as I said in before, a construction example, you have a normal supplier where you get all of your wood and your steel from, and they're completely out, they're on back order. And so you reach out to, another state, North Dakota, and you get a supplier who decides I can charge them double because they need it so badly. They have no choice. So we get a lot of price gouging and fraud schemes. Next slide. So 2 minutes left here. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a takeaway here. What can you do to minimize the risk of fraud, specifically during the pandemic, beyond, and honestly before? The first here is just set an appropriate tone at the top. It's crucial for management, ownership of an organization, the board, to really continually communicate how important ethics are, how important internal controls are, how important anti-fraud controls are, even in the midst of a pandemic, even when everything else is insane and everything else is crazy and there's a lot of unknown. The one thing that a company needs to stand by is their ethics, their code of conduct, the employee manual that was signed when they first got hired. Look, no matter what happens out in this organization, we're still going to operate our business ethically. We take it very seriously when people attempt to steal. It's not happening here, and we will prosecute you if it happens. The third is check employee references. That's a constant. You should always be doing that. The third is examine the bank statements. We have organizations that worried about fraud. They've had fraud happen, and one of the things that we've recognized is that they didn't really have anyone outside of the person who was writing checks, as an example, who is really examining the bank statements, really looking at copies of the canceled checks. During the pandemic, that is even more crucial. And that example of someone who has the check printer at home and the check stock, certainly someone else from management or the board should be taking a look at those canceled checks and make sure that one's not written to her or one's not written to her business that she has on the side, or her husband's business, or her brother-in-law, or her dog. Who the heck knows? Make sure that the actual checks match what's going into the GL. You should maintain strong internal controls, creating a positive work environment similar to the tone at the top. And what's really crucial is you should look at what got cut out of your business as far as protections, in compliance, protections in IT, protections that are related to financial internal controls. If you look back and you recognize, man, we really cut some important things from the months of March to August, and now we have them back, but we really, if we look back at that period, we were vulnerable, we were weak. Is there something we should do now to take a look back at that period of time, kick the tires, make sure that no fraud occurred at a time when we were left kind of wide open? So in that sense, consult a certified fraud examiner. The last thing I'll leave you with here before I think we can take some questions is over 50% of frauds are found initially through a tip. So it's an employee tip, a vendor tip, a customer tip. So during the pandemic, if things went on, you should have had a way that someone could call in and say, you know what, I've worked beside Becky for 10 years. She's really, really struggling. And, I saw her walk out of here the other day, and I think she had some canceled checks with her. I think she had some extra cash in her pocket. I'm really concerned about this one vendor that she just brought in. You should have an anonymous fraud hotline, a tip hotline, or a compliance officer that people are comfortable going to, because over 50% of the time when a fraud is discovered, it's discovered through a tip. And so the best way that you can protect yourself against fraud and finding fraud if it's occurring is by having a fraud hotline or a tip hotline. I recommend an anonymous fraud tip hotline and encourages people to call. And so I want you to keep that in mind. If you don't take any other thing away from this presentation today, from my presentation, you can take plenty away from John's. He did a great job. From my side of the presentation, it's make sure that you have a good way that people can report in fraud and that they can identify something, that see something, say something mentality. Okay, so that again ends my portion, I believe. Next slide. Let's make sure that was it. All right, perfect. So there's John and my contact information. Before we get into questions, I just want to encourage you, any other questions, any business specific questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to John and I. Shoot us an email. You can look us up on the Bonadio webpage, and our number is right there. I love talking about fraud. It's the world I live in. John loves talking about IT and cybersecurity. It's the world he lives in. Call me at 9 o'clock at night. I'll answer. We'll talk for an hour. It doesn't bother me at all. So questions come up, issues, thoughts, please don't hesitate to reach out to John and I. It's all that we do. And we really appreciate having us today. Let's see if there's any questions.
Well, looks like so far we don't have any in the chat box. I'm just amazed at the information you provided. Again, it's amazing to me, mostly because most of it doesn't even occur to me. I can't even imagine that people would do this. But I liked your the last tips there. It starts at the top. You really have to set that tone and have your written ethics. I think that's super important and overlooked because a lot of people just assume that everyone feels the same way. It's like, well, of course I trust everyone around me, but that's amazing. So if anyone has any questions, please type them here in the box, and we'll make sure they get to Tim and John.
Yeah, one of the things I'll say on that, Jessica, and I think John would agree, is the companies that are the best at fraud protection and the best at cybersecurity protection are the ones who've had an incident. They're typically the ones that understand that the investment money is well worth it. When they're put through a situation and when they have to have a fraud investigation, or when they've had a cyber incident and they have to go through all of that process, they realize that the money, although it seems like an expenditure before an incident has happened, it is well worth the money to not have it happen. And so organizations typically, if you talk to someone who's had a fraud incident, they say, oh, we take that very seriously. We have good protections in place. We're really hopeful that that never happens again, because going through that was extremely painful. And we had to have a lot of professionals involved, and it was not fun. It was not a good time. And the other thing is that companies are often very naive. Again, it's one of those things like you don't understand it until it happens to you. And John and I are telling you, it happens to just about everyone sometime throughout their career. Almost every organization at some point experiences some type of incident or fraud incident and has to ultimately deal with it. And most of the time when it happens, the organization just throws up hands and says, oh my God, what do we do? I never thought this would happen to us. I never thought any of my people would do this to me. I never thought we would get hacked. Now what do we do? And now they're calling professionals. They're calling, you know, people like me and John, and they're frantic and they don't know what to do. And we say, okay, it happens all the time. Let's talk about the steps that you have to go through. It's not as bad as you think, but this is not going to be fun. This is not going to be a good time. You're not going to enjoy this. And you're going to hope that you never have to talk to me again when we're done. That's just the way that it works. So John, you got input on that? I'm sure you had a lot of fun.
Unfortunately, it takes a compelling event to get people to change their mind about certain things, especially as it relates to information technology and cybersecurity. So I couldn't agree more. Don't suffer that compelling event. Be proactive and take the recommendations that Tim and I have made and put those into practical use so you don't have to call us. Because as Tim said, inevitably it's gonna happen. And it's just how prepared are you for when it does happen that will make all the difference in the world.
That's fantastic information, a lot to think about. Again, any questions, if you would like to contact Tim and John, if you think of anything afterwards, please do. So I'll go ahead and just kind of go into the things that we have coming up. Please, if you have any economic champions that you would like to nominate, it's by tomorrow. And we do have a lot to celebrate. I know there's a lot going on in the business community in our region, both good and bad, and we definitely want to celebrate those good stories. So please, if you can think of anyone to nominate, we would love to hear about it. And then we've got a professional development series coming up. That's Eyes on the Future, Skills to Help Further Your Career. So that's with us. It's a 6-week program for young professionals. And that starts on October 22nd. So that's coming up. And there is an early bird special. So please, that's also by tomorrow. And then please stay connected with us. We have COVID-19 resources. You'll see all of the links right here on the screen. We still have our reopening toolkit available for everyone. Our events that are coming up, stay connected, please. And any questions at all for Center State CEO or for the Bonadio Group, reach out to us at support@centerstateceo.com. We'd love to help you. So with that, thank you all so much, Kristen, John, and Tim, for such a great presentation. Very timely, and thank you all for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you again real soon.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.